Bruno was 28 years old and known online as one of the top urban travel influencers in the country. Always chasing forgotten places, dark corners, and abandoned spaces, he had his camera ready to capture the hidden side of the city for his loyal followers. Tonight, dressed in his black jacket and carrying his tripod, he was about to start a special live stream, exploring an abandoned subway tunnel, a place few dared to enter. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of rust and decay, and a silence so thick it almost swallowed every footstep. As he walked down the empty subway corridor, Bruno spoke excitedly to his thousands of viewers. "You guys won't believe what I'm about to show you tonight. This place is pure forgotten history." But, wait, did you hear that? A distant metallic click echoed through the tunnel, eerie and unnatural. A shiver ran down his spine as his eyes darted into the darkness ahead. Something felt off, a sudden chill wrapped around him, and the oppressive silence grew heavier. He felt like something was watching him, an invisible presence that made his skin crawl, even though no one else was there. Suddenly, his vision blurred, as if a vivid mental film began to play before his eyes. In intense flashes, he saw the subway tracks engulfed in deep darkness, lights flickering and failing, the sharp hiss of an electrical collapse growing nearer, and then an explosion that lit the tunnel with a ghostly blaze. The ground trembled, and distorted voices echoed in Bruno's mind, a chaotic mix of screams and sirens. The scene lasted only seconds, but the image of disaster branded itself onto his soul. He blinked, and the vision vanished, leaving him gasping, his heart pounding like it wanted to burst free. Bruno tried to tell himself it was just a hallucination, the stress and shadows playing tricks on him. But the cold sweat on his forehead, the faint smell of burning in the air, and the creeping dread wouldn't lie. He took a step back, weighed down by the premonition. Something horribly real was about to happen in that very place. On impulse, he grabbed his phone to warn his followers, but words escaped him. His voice trembled as he said, "Guys, something's wrong here. I can't explain it, but, trust me, something bad is going to happen." The clock stopped. The silence was deafening. The stream flickered and then cut out suddenly. He ran out of the dark carriage, his footsteps echoing wildly in his ears, feeling the danger closing in. Deep down, a shadow seemed to follow every move, an invisible presence no one else could see, except him. And that night, before the live stream went viral, Bruno had no idea that his premonition was just the beginning of a nightmare blurring the line between reality and the supernatural. The morning after his terrifying vision, Bruno barely slept. His mind raced with images of fire, darkness, and the sudden explosion beneath the city. Despite the gnawing unease, he forced himself to prepare for another live stream, this time, from a different location, hoping to shake off the shadow that clung to him. But the underground tunnels were never far from his thoughts. Bruno's phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages flooded in from followers who had watched the night's cut-off live stream. Some urged caution, others sent eerie comments. "Did you see that shadow behind you? Pause at 12:37, there's something moving in the dark." Bruno frowned, replaying his footage frame by frame. Strange flickers, vague silhouettes appeared where there should have been nothing but emptiness. The comments poured in like whispers from the void, unsettling him even more. He realized this wasn't just about the tunnel anymore, something else had followed him into the light. Meanwhile, news of a sudden electrical failure in the old subway lines began to surface on social media and local news outlets. A brief blackout, quickly fixed, but enough to stir worry among commuters and city officials. Bruno's vision had been no hallucination, it had foreshadowed a real incident. A small victory that felt hollow. He decided to visit the site, hoping to find some answers, or at least to reassure himself. At the scene, Bruno met Clara, a young urban explorer with a sharp mind and skeptical gaze. She had also ventured into the tunnels before, documenting abandoned places with a different approach, scientific and cautious. "You're Bruno, right? I saw your live," she said, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "That place gives me the creeps, but your vision. That's something else. Bruno nodded, grateful for the company. They walked through the fenced-off entrance where police had begun restricting access. I don't know what I saw, Bruno admitted, but it felt real. Like the place itself was warning me. Clara frowned, scanning the graffiti-stained walls. Maybe it's all just stress, the mind playing tricks in the dark. But if you're right, maybe we're not the only ones sensing something. As the day wore on, the media frenzy grew. Footage from security cameras near the subway began circulating, showing brief flickers of unexplained shadows crossing the platforms moments before the blackout. Reporters speculated about electrical faults, but underground workers whispered about something more sinister, old legends about the ghost train, a phantom carriage said to haunt the abandoned tunnels. Bruno's paranoia deepened. He felt watched, even in broad daylight. Every notification on his phone sent his heart racing. His followers' theories ranged from supernatural curses to conspiracies involving city officials hiding dangerous secrets. The line between reality and fear blurred further with each passing hour. He stopped answering calls and stayed indoors, obsessively reviewing every frame of his recordings. One evening, his close friend and fellow content creator, Marcos, dropped by. Marcos was pragmatic, the kind of guy who mocked superstitions and always grounded Bruno's wild ideas. "You're letting this get to you," Marcos said, handing him a cup of coffee. "The blackout happened, yeah, but it's just that, a blackout. Not a curse." Bruno looked up, eyes hollow but determined. "What if it's more? What if this thing, whatever it is still coming? And it's not just about the tunnel anymore?" Marcos shrugged but promised to help investigate, knowing Bruno needed support. That night, as Bruno tried to sleep, a cold breeze swept through his apartment, making the curtains flutter unnaturally. The city's usual noises faded into a heavy silence. Somewhere in the darkness, a faint metallic click echoed again, just like before. His phone buzzed with a new message from a follower. "Bruno, look behind you on the last live. The shadow is closer now." He turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Or was there? His breath hitched. The dread settled deep in his bones. Bruno realized the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days after the blackout turned into a nightmare for Bruno and those close to him. The strange shadows and eerie messages from his followers were no longer confined to his live streams, they seeped into his waking life. He couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was stalking him. Every time his phone chimed with a notification, his heart jumped, as if the shadows themselves were whispering threats through the screen. Then came the news that shattered the fragile veil of rationality. Marcos was dead. The police called it a freak accident. He had fallen down a stairwell late at night after leaving a bar. But the circumstances didn't add up. Witnesses claimed hearing strange noises moments before the fall. His phone was found shattered nearby, the screen cracked, but still displaying an unfinished text message to Bruno, "It's coming. Be careful." Bruno stared at the message over and over. The panic clawed at his chest, suffocating him with a cold grip. He remembered their last conversation, the skepticism, the mockery, and the reluctant promise to help. Marcos had died trying to protect him, or at least that was how it felt. Clara, who had become an uneasy ally, joined Bruno at Marcos's apartment to piece together what had happened. "This isn't a coincidence," she said, voice low and tense. "The accident, the timing, it fits the pattern." She showed Bruno a map she had marked with recent strange incidents and accidents around the city, all eerily connected to locations near the abandoned subway lines. Bruno's fingers trembled as he traced the lines on the map. "It's like the shadow is moving through the city," he whispered. "Following us. Hunting." Despite the mounting evidence, not everyone believed. A mutual friend, Sarah, scoffed when Bruno shared his fears. "You're reading too much into this," she said sharply. "People die every day. It's tragic, but it's not some curse or supernatural force." Her words stung, but Bruno couldn't shake the gnawing doubt growing inside him. Was Sarah right? Or was the darkness truly closing in? That night, Bruno sat alone in his apartment, the glow of his laptop casting long shadows on the walls. He replayed the last moments of Marcos's life, trying to find clues that could explain the unexplainable. The footage from a nearby surveillance camera showed a fleeting silhouette standing just behind Marcos moments before the fall, an indistinct, shifting shadow that vanished when the light flickered on. A chill crept up Bruno's spine. He whispered to the empty room, "It's real. The shadow is real." The city outside seemed to hold its breath as Bruno realized the terrifying truth: this was no ordinary accident. The death was just the beginning, a signal that the nightmare was far from over. And somewhere, lurking just beyond the veil of reality, the shadow waited patiently for its next victim. Bruno sat hunched over his laptop in the dim light of his cluttered apartment, surrounded by maps, photos, and notes pinned haphazardly on the walls. The chilling realization that Marcos's death was not random had turned his fear into a desperate need for answers. Each new piece of information fit like a grim puzzle, a dark pattern emerging from the chaos. Clara, ever methodical, helped him chart the sequence of strange incidents. "Look here," she said, pointing to dates and locations linked to mysterious accidents and unexplained shadows. "If this is a cycle, there's an order, a deadly rhythm." Bruno nodded slowly, the weight of knowledge pressing down on him. He felt the walls closing in, the oppressive silence of the night almost deafening. "Who's next?" he whispered, dread creeping into his voice. "And how do we stop it?" Despite their growing urgency, Bruno struggled to convince Sarah, their skeptical friend. "You have to see the signs," he pleaded during a tense confrontation. "This isn't coincidence. We're being hunted." Sarah shook her head, frustration flashing in her eyes. "I don't believe in curses or shadows. People die, yes, but this fear is eating you alive." Her refusal only deepened Bruno's isolation. The shadow was narrowing its grip, and doubt threatened to swallow him whole. Late one evening, Bruno tried calling Clara to warn her after spotting a new pattern. A familiar route taken by one of their small group. But the line was dead. Panic surged through him as he raced to her apartment, only to find the door ajar and the place in disarray. No sign of Clara. Just a faint scent of something burnt lingering in the air. He frantically searched the neighborhood, heart pounding, senses on high alert. It was then that he noticed a fresh scuff mark near the sidewalk, like someone had stumbled or been dragged. A whisper of movement flickered at the edge of his vision. "No," he breathed, frozen. The shadow was closing in again. The news broke the next morning: Clara had died in a mysterious fire at her apartment, the cause unknown. Investigators found no clear explanation. An electrical fault was suspected, but it felt too convenient. Bruno's world collapsed. The pattern was undeniable. The shadow wasn't just an apparition, it was a harbinger of death. Haunted by grief and desperation, Bruno vowed to find a way to break the cycle. But with each passing hour, the deadly rhythm ticked on, relentless, inevitable. The shadow waited, patient and merciless, a reminder that some forces can't be cheated, only survived, for a while. Bruno barely slept. Every hour felt like a countdown to disaster as he and a dwindling group of allies scoured old newspapers, digital archives, and obscure forums. They needed to understand the pattern, the invisible thread weaving death through their lives. With each new lead, the nightmare tightened its grip. "Look at this," Clara's notes flashed on his laptop screen before she disappeared. Dates and locations of bizarre accidents over the last decade, all near abandoned subway lines, all involving people who had some connection to warnings or unexplained phenomena. "It's like a curse, or a cycle that repeats itself," Bruno murmured. His followers online had begun sharing eerie footage, shadows creeping just beyond the edge of the camera, voices barely audible beneath the static. Some claimed to have seen Bruno himself, broadcasting from the abandoned subway, days after he vanished. The line between reality and something darker blurred. In a desperate bid to break free, the group tried to change the pattern. They switched meeting places, altered routines, and even attempted to skip their turn, but the shadow proved relentless. The silence before each incident was deafening, the tension unbearable. Then came the next death. Sarah, the skeptic, became the third victim. An unlikely accident. She had been driving home when her car inexplicably veered off the road into a ravine. No witnesses, no signs of brake marks. Just silence and the cruel finality of loss. Bruno's world shattered again. "Why can't we stop this?" he whispered to himself, voice cracking. Paranoia gnawed at his sanity. Every passing stranger felt like a threat, every shadow held menace. The line between protector and prey blurred. They dug deeper, discovering similar stories from decades past. People who vanished or died mysteriously after encountering the abandoned subway. Legends, warnings buried under layers of time and fear. The shadow was older than they imagined, patient and cruel. As another night fell, Bruno stared at his phone, the screen glowing with new messages from followers reporting strange disturbances. A cold dread settled over him. The race against time wasn't just about survival, it was about staying sane long enough to face what was coming. The shadow waited. And it was hungry. The circle had tightened. Only Bruno remained, or so he thought. Exhausted and haunted, he knew the shadow was closing in for the final act. Every breath felt heavy, every sound a possible warning. The city's silence was louder than ever, as if it held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Bruno planned meticulously. He rewrote routines, changed locations, avoided contact. But isolation was its own prison. The fear gnawed deeper, twisting thoughts into knots. His only ally now was a cryptic message from an unknown number: "You can't run from it. But maybe you can outsmart it." He traced the message to an obscure forum, a group of survivors from years before, who had also encountered the shadow. Their advice was sparse and cryptic: patterns must be broken by facing the fear, by refusing to play the shadow's game. But no one had truly succeeded. The night of his last planned live stream approached. Bruno set up his camera inside the abandoned subway wagon, the very place where it all began. The air was thick with anticipation, a silent scream frozen in time. As the camera flickered to life, he spoke softly, his voice trembling but resolute. "This is it," he said, eyes scanning the darkness. "If this ends badly, remember me." Minutes passed, heavy and slow. Then, faint movements shimmered at the edge of the frame, shadows that weren't his own, creeping closer, almost alive. Bruno's breath hitched. Suddenly, a cold chill enveloped the wagon. The lights flickered violently, then went out. The camera's night vision kicked in, revealing a form, indistinct, shifting, but unmistakably there. "Who's there?" Bruno whispered, heart pounding. The shadow seemed to lean closer, as if savoring the moment. Then, the screen went black. Silence. And then, static. The live stream ended. Months had passed since Bruno's last broadcast. The world moved on, the abandoned subway wagon sealed off, buried beneath layers of rumors and forgotten warnings. Some called it a hoax, others whispered about curses, but none could deny the void left behind. Bruno's name became a ghost in online forums, a myth tangled with shadows and silence. Somewhere far from the city, a man tried to rebuild a life, haunted by fragmented memories and the feeling that something watched him from just beyond the edge of perception. One quiet evening, he sat alone in a small, dimly lit room. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and something faintly metallic. The clock on the wall ticked unevenly, a subtle reminder of time's fragile hold. He heard it then, a soft, almost imperceptible click. A shiver ran down his spine. The lights flickered briefly, then steadied. He turned slowly, but no one was there. Or was there a sudden sharp sound, like a snap? A muffled, distant cry. And then, silence. The room seemed to hold its breath. The final echo of a fate long sealed. The shadow had waited, patient and cruel. The cycle was complete. Death always wins.